I'm Rachel Shortridge, 32, an architect, the quiet daughter in a family that always took great pictures. I lead with my profession because it's a reflex. Every day I draft structures with loads, beams, columns, and bending moments. But tonight, right here on my own walnut dining table, I'm watching a different kind of structure crack. My mom's rosemary chicken smells comforting. The holiday china glints under the chandelier, and the old fridge in the den is humming as if keeping a decades-long secret. My dad raised his glass as if toasting a joke I wasn't invited to hear. He looked past me toward my sister, Helena, but his eyes went straight through me. "Your sister built all this herself," he said, a slight sneer on his lip. "Not like you." The sentence fell like a verdict. My mom's hand froze over the serving spoon. Helena's fork stopped midair. I heard my own heartbeat shift, and my voice came out, low, clear, and unnervingly calm. "Then I'll stop sending the money." The silence wasn't empty. It was thick, weighted by everything we'd swallowed over the years. The chandelier light buzzed faintly, like an old circuit, and the glare on the plates was suddenly too harsh. My father blinked once, then again, like a man learning to see in a new light. "What money?" he asked, not angry, but bewildered. And the bewilderment hurt worse. It said that what I had done was invisible, or worse, had been erased. I am Rachel, the daughter who chose silence to keep the peace until tonight. From the outside looking in, we were the perfect family. Sunday dinners, matching sweater Christmas cards, and a front porch railing my dad always promised to fix but never did. Taking a good picture is always cheaper than living well. When the recession hit and our family slid into debt, I started transferring $5,000 on the first of every month so my parents could breathe. Dad doesn't use online banking. He doesn't trust screens to hold money. So I transferred it to Helena's account, our family's translator of pride. She promised to withdraw the cash and give it directly to them. I believed her because our family was used to living by believing her. $5,000 a month since last April, I said, my eyes locked on my dad. I sent it to Helena because you don't do transfers. The air in the kitchen thinned by a degree. My mom's eyes widened, then feared, then settled on Helena, like a tilting stove with only one person who could keep it level. Helena. 2 syllables that were both a question and a plea. My sister's jaw hardened, and for a flash, I saw the scaffolding she'd built for her veneer, polished, angular, and demanding belief. "She's exaggerating," Helena said, her voice dry. "Sometimes it was late. Not every month was—" I shook my head. "Every first. I have the confirmation." People talk about a broken heart, but what I heard then was more like the sound of a structural support beam buckling, the sound of a component that had been carrying too much load for too long. Dad turned to Helena. "We haven't seen a dime." The word dime sounded ridiculous and painful, rolling across the hardwood floor, like a coin dropping in an empty hall. The house suddenly felt vast and exposed, a stage with too much empty space between the actors. Helena avoided his eyes, staring at a random point. "It's complicated." The warm smell of rosemary suddenly turned cold. Before tonight, I would have yielded. I would have over-explained, softened my voice, waited, and hoped. But there is a moment when the quiet person realizes their silence has been used as a foundation for others to stand taller. I remembered the perfectly aligned transactions in my banking app, a rhythm as steady as the monthly bill for an unacknowledged peace treaty. I remembered my last visit, the peeling paint, the humming fridge, the signs of a slow rot we convinced ourselves was temporary, and the texts from Helena, handled. I had wanted to believe those 2 words until the act of believing became a high-interest loan. If you're listening and you recognize this rhythm, if you've been the one paying for the quiet, let me know where you are. In a car parked outside your family's house, not ready to walk into dinner? In a small apartment where silence is safer than the truth? Or in a house like mine, with picture frames on the mantel telling a sweeter story than the 4 walls can bear? Tell me, so I know I'm not alone in drawing a boundary and learning to stand on the line myself. My dad set his glass down, the sound too loud on the table. He said to Helena, "Explain." The word wasn't a roar. It was rough, like dry lumber. Helena straightened her back, as if posture could reinforce her argument. There were costs, there were investments. You always told me to think big. She gave a brittle laugh, as if this were just a minor footnote on a life's balance sheet. What kind of investment eats $60,000 and still lets the mortgage slip? I asked. She tilted her head, the same look she used in high school when she called things I loved cute. You wouldn't understand, Rachel. You only trust what's safe. I swallowed, finding a firmer truth. Trusting your family shouldn't be dangerous. Some stories explode, others peel back in thin layers like old wallpaper. Tonight was both. My dad pushed back his chair and stood, one hand braced on the table edge, the veins tight like a raised map. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. A rare moment when he didn't have a speech prepared. My mom placed her spoon down very slowly, like disarming a landmine. "It's going to be okay," she said, to no one in particular. But tired hope has a distinct tone, and I heard it clearly. The memory of the moment the house shifted wasn't in a shout or a slammed door. It was in the pause of the fridge's hum, as if it too had been holding its breath for years and just ran out of air. It was in the faint glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling of my old room, the dots I put up at 16, believing I could pin a future map to the roof and follow it. It was in Helena's eyes sliding off all of us and failing to hold on to anything. In that moment, I understood. This wasn't just a family fight anymore. This was the first tremor of a structural collapse. "I'm stopping," I said, not to hurt, but to stop being hurt. No more transfers from me, not through anyone. I watched the words spill out and take up the space they had been denied for years. My dad looked at me as if he'd just seen a blueprint he never expected me to draw. My mom reached out, touching my wrist, cold and light, the old signal, stay. But staying had gotten us here. Leaving, at least, leaving the old arrangement, was the only way for anything to still stand. A neat story would cut here. Blackout, the camera pulling back through the window. Real life doesn't. The first thing that happened was smaller. The gentle scrape of a chair, a smear of sauce left on a plate. The way a house readjusts when the load changes. The next things were slower. A night of half sleep. A lamp turned on. A laptop opened. A transfer log suddenly resembling an escape map. And before I tell you how everything slid and how we built it back with the truth, know this. When I drew the line, I wasn't punishing anyone. I was just stopping the interest payments on a silence that wasn't mine. People often called us the family that knew how to look good on camera. Every holiday, Mom would set out the best china. Dad would make us stand close together on the porch, and the sunlight would filter through the holly bushes like a vintage lens. The picture was the same every year. Bright red sweaters, half smiles, arms wrapped around shoulders. No one saw the moments afterward. Helena quickly checking her hair in the front-facing camera. Mom turning away to gather things. Dad frowning because the porch railing was still loose and he hadn't fixed it. And me, the seems-fine daughter, rushing to the kitchen to check if the oven was off. From a distance, beauty is always linear. Up close, you see the seams. Helena is 2 years older than me. As a child, she had a way of bending light toward her. She'd hold up a paper lotus ticket to the sky, and it would suddenly look like sparkling metal. In school, she was the cheer captain, the one the teacher entrusted with handing out report cards because only Helena is careful and trustworthy. The neighbors always said, "Frank's older one is something. She's really ambitious." She knew exactly when to change a thank you into a "yes, I'll try harder," and when to shed a small tear so adults would open their arms. I liked sitting at the edge of the bleachers, noting in my notebook the sound of cleats, the smell of wood varnish, the rhythm of the bass drum, how everything stood firm thanks to invisible joints. Back then, I didn't have the language of architecture, but I understood the feeling, a structure that could look brilliant on the outside and be quietly hollow on the inside. My father, Frank, ran a family diner for 2 decades, a man who believed in straight talk, in the hammer strike, in hand-delivered invoices signed in blue ink. He didn't trust anything he couldn't touch. Online banking, digital wallets, PDF invoices, to him, they were as vague as a promise in the wind. He ran our home like he ran his kitchen, with a loud voice as command and order as morality. My mother, Margaret, was gentler, speaking as softly as she smoothed a bedsheet. The woman who chose patience as her language. She wasn't a liar, she was a translator, converting her husband's wounded pride into just enough apology, wrapping the sharp edges of the dinner table in lace doilies. I became an architect, a choice both obvious and stubborn. I wanted to draw things that could bear weight without needing a scream to hold them up. In school, I wasn't as dazzling as Helena, but I was persistent, staying late in the studio, repeating a cross-section just to find a way for light to slip through a crack without chilling the room. If Helena lived on stage, I lived backstage, where people tightened the screws, pulled the wires, and measured the angles with a triangle ruler. The family accepted my role. Rachel is dependable. From then on, anything that needed to be on time, certain, or handled, they called me. Then the recession hit. The numbers on my parents' bank statements were no longer decoration. They were a knock on the door at dawn. Due. I had been working for a year. My salary wasn't high yet, but I knew exactly how much a roof weighs. I told Mom, "Let me help until you two catch up." The round number sounded tidy, $5,000 a month, like a steel beam placed exactly where it needed to be. Dad frowned. "Don't transfer it." "I don't trust it." Helena stood nearby, quick as someone redirecting light. "Transfer it to me. I'll give it to them. Dad will be comfortable." I agreed, and so every first of the month, Between technical drawings and client emails, I hit the send button, watched the word completed appear, and felt my heart tighten like a bolt. We were a construction crew. Everyone carried their load. The first month, Helena texted one word, handled. The second month, done. The third month, she sent a confetti emoji. I didn't ask for photos of the receipt, didn't demand confirmation from my parents. When a load-bearing system is working, you don't take the bolts out just to hear them creak. Slowly, that firefighting job became a routine. I designed by day and paid for peace by night. In the Christmas photos, the porch railing was still unfixed, but everyone's smile was still beautiful. Even so, the house began speaking its own small language that outsiders couldn't hear. The paint was peeling at the corner of the kitchen door, a thin line the size of a fingernail. The fridge hummed longer than before every time it was opened. The chair by the window squeaked like an old person. I asked Mom. She smiled. Helena is helping manage everything. I wanted to believe it. Believe it until it became a debt of time. I was grateful to Dad for working hard his whole life, but he was also the one who built a stage where Helena was directed as the lead role. Phrases like, "Your sister has grit, Helena has vision," gradually became dividing walls, pushing the remaining quiet efforts into the shadow. I wasn't jealous, I took notes. I reminded myself, a structure stands because of the part people don't see. But the part people don't see is also the easiest to forget. One day I opened the cupboard to grab a big plate and saw the surface was gritty, as if there was a hairline crack. I put it down, listening. There was no sound but my own heart, a hammer tapping 3 times. Check the component, check the load, check the history. Family culture, where I come from, sometimes lives by an old song. Family is where you don't keep score. I grew up on that song and learned an addendum. In families with a golden child, loans of trust often have no due date. I wasn't asking Helena to answer for my feelings. I just wanted the wall of our house to stop cracking. But every time I came home, I saw the crack lengthen a bit more. The staircase handrail looser, the doormat thinner, Mom's eyes quicker to change the subject whenever Dad started comparing. And I, the responsible daughter, kept sending the money. Every time I hit the button, I reminded myself, this is a load-bearing beam, not a life raft. I used to think Helena was the one with the map, and I was the one with the ruler. But a map can be drawn in the clouds, while a ruler only knows one truth. Measurements don't lie. Last year, during a townhouse renovation project, I pulled up the hardwood floor and saw the beams had rotted from the middle. The surface was still shiny, but a touch would crumble it. I took a photo, sent it to the client, and wrote, "Beam replacement required." That evening, home for dinner, I looked into Helena's eyes when she said, "Don't worry, I've got everything handled." I swallowed the phrase, "beam replacement required," turning it into a sigh. Then that night came, the night the dining table could not bear any more silence. I hadn't planned a rebellion, I just ran out of capacity to hold up a component that refused repair. When Dad's familiar comparison hit my familiar spot, the answer sprang out as a defense mechanism. Then I'll stop sending the money. It echoed inside me exactly like the sound of a ballpoint pen striking through a recurring payment. I had no regrets. I was scared. scared of the house shaking, but I knew if it didn't shake, it would collapse without warning. The next morning, I woke up in my old room. The ceiling was still the glow-in-the-dark sky of my 16-year-old self. I pulled open the desk drawer and saw the hand-drawn sketch of the first design I ever won an award for in my freshman year. A small house with wide windows to let light in without letting the wind rush through. I touched the sketch, hearing a whisper from the past, "Redesign it." When an old house speaks in the creaks of wood, an architect answers with a drawing. And that's why, instead of getting angry or sinking down, I chose the way I know best, tracing the path. A tradesperson starts by examining the connections. A child starts with the transfer history. A sister starts by looking straight at her sibling and asking herself, "Since when did we use family ties as a pipeline to transfer responsibility?" I folded the sketch, put it in my coat pocket, and went down to the kitchen. Dad was sitting there, his back more hunched, his eyes redder. Mom stood by the window, her coffee cold. Helena was nowhere to be seen. The house whispered one more thing. "It's time to lift the floorboards." The morning after the crack, the kitchen looked like a crime scene that had been hastily cleaned. Dishes neatly stacked, tablecloth smooth, but the atmosphere was thin and cold, like fresh poured concrete that hadn't set. Dad sat hunched over a folded newspaper he wasn't reading. Mom stood by the window, a cold cup of coffee on the sill. Helena, gone, no slammed door, no note. The house's body had its own way of telling the truth. It was so silent you could hear the joints creak. I brought my laptop down to the table, opening the lid like a tradesperson opening a toolbox. The screen lit up, numbers lined up straight like steel beams on a factory ceiling. $5,000 on the first of every month, from last April until now. 4 columns, date, transaction ID, recipient account, memo family support. Each line was a pulse beat. $60,000 total, perfectly straight, not a dime out of place. I magnified the screen, scrolling the cursor up. A cross-section of life drawn with data. If an architect could draw the as-built plan of a finished structure, this was the as-paid for a rotten family structure. Dad looked up when he heard the keyboard tapping, then quickly lowered his gaze. Mom turned around. "Rachel, maybe you should take a break." I shook my head, my voice sounding strange because it was so steady. "I'm not angry, I'm measuring." Measuring means recording the true dimensions and comparing them to the blueprint. Measuring means giving truth its proper weight back. I opened my photo folder, pulling up the pictures from Christmas, Mother's Day, Thanksgiving, placing them next to the transaction log like stacked floor layers, a beautiful surface covering a broken mesh of steel beneath. A text from Helena popped up in the corner of the screen. "Don't make a big deal of it. I'll handle it." 20 characters. I took a screenshot, saving the file as handled to. I didn't reply. Replying would be adding more soft material to a wall that needs steel reinforcement. Somewhere, a report I once read about family finances resurfaced. In middle-class families, the dependable child often shoulders 70% of the financial aid, but receives less than 30% of the recognition. The data didn't soothe the pain, but it made the loneliness less acute. I messaged Evan, a colleague and the only person at the office who had ever seen me frustrated. "You free?" I need a clear set of eyes and a black coffee. Evan arrived at noon, his coat still damp from the rain. He looked over the transaction lines. Nice rhythm. I laughed at the word nice as perfectly aligned roof tiles over a termite-ridden truss. We created a spreadsheet file, column A transfer date, column B recipient account, column C memo, column D status. Evan added column E, secondary entry, to track where the money went after it hit Helena's account. If the bank lets you see, he said, we can trace the flow like tracing a drain pipe. In the afternoon, I went to the bank branch. The counter was bright white. The air conditioning smelled abstract. The printer made soft scratching noises. I presented my case, pointing to the transfer confirmations. The manager, a woman with eyes as sharp as a steel ruler, asked permission to investigate. The sound of her typing was like rain on a tin roof. Then she looked up. These transfers all went into the same account, ending in 389 belonging to Helena Shortridge. She paused, typed again, and from there, many transfers were sent out. I asked, "Where to?" She glanced at the screen, lowering her voice. The most frequently repeated recipient name is Mason Vale. Mason Vale. The name dropped into my head like a rivet capping a nail, fastening two metal layers that had long been separate, suspicion and proof. "Who is he?" I asked. The manager shook her head. "I can't provide personal information, but many transactions are described as seed, prototype, beta. Sounds like a tech startup." I thanked her. She added, "You can request certified statements. If necessary, your lawyer can request extended information." Stepping outside, the rain was fine, like gypsum dust. I stood under the awning, feeling the cold seep in through very narrow gaps. Exactly how a single word can slip through a tight-knit family. His name repeated in my head, a rhythm, Mason Vale, a last name like a curtain. That evening, Evan set up his laptop on the kitchen table. We typed Mason Vale into every search box we could think of. Of course, the public findings were only fragments. A funding event profile with some blurry photos of an app connecting local artisans with clients. A trite post about community-driven innovation. A social media account using buzzwords like cheap seasoning, scalable, disruptive, traction. Evan curled his lip. Smells fake. I nodded. Smells like a design without structural components. I reopened the spreadsheet file, sorted the columns by time, using color to highlight the transfers out of Helena's account that fell on the 2nd or 3rd of every month, like a scheduled vacuum cleaner. Mom stood behind me, gripping the edge of a chair. "Rachel, are you sure you want to go all the way?" That question wasn't a deterrent. It was a stress test. "Mom," I said, "if we leave it alone, the house will collapse silently." Mom looked at me for a long time, then nodded, her eyes no longer evading. That gave me a strange kind of courage, permission from the person who used to wrap sharp table edges in lace. That night, I opened a pre-drafted email to a familiar lawyer, Miss Harris, who had done the legal paperwork for a housing project. Subject: Request for support regarding family transfers, potential fraud. The content was unemotional, just clear lines, timing, amount, intermediary name, secondary recipient name, send. An architect cannot wait for wood to dry on its own. You have to introduce air, light, and space for it to breathe without cracking. Legal work is the same. applying force to your side before the structure is overloaded. Near midnight, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. A calm female voice. This is Harris. I got your email. Bring all your confirmations to my office tomorrow morning. I'll file the request for supplementary bank statements and send a notice to preserve evidence. I thanked her, brief as a handshake. Hanging up, I felt an emptiness in my chest, not fear but space to breathe in. I want to say that at that moment I hated Helena. But actually, what I hated was the mechanism that allowed this to continue. The compliments like a rug, covering the holes, the handled sentences like tape, haphazardly pasted over rotten components. I asked myself, since when did we start using family ties as a pipeline to transfer money and push responsibility? And Mason, the man behind his curtain of a last name, what did he promise Helena that made her choose to believe him rather than the cracked wood of her own home? Near dawn, I dozed off on the sofa, the laptop still open on the spreadsheet page. I dreamed of a house without walls. Air flowed freely. Nowhere was damp enough for mold to cling. Waking up, I knew that dream was just a concept drawing. A real house needs walls, and real walls need brick, steel, and checked connections. Truth is the first material. The next morning, as I prepared to meet the lawyer, the doorbell rang. Dad came downstairs. Mom set her coffee cup down, and I opened the door. The man standing there wore a hoodie, jeans, and a practiced smile. "Hi, Rachel," he said, his voice as light as last night's rain. "I'm Mason." The name stepped out of the bank screen onto my front porch, carrying the scent of cheap cologne and the confidence of a dream salesman. Behind me, Dad's footsteps halted. Beside me, Mom gripped the edge of the table. I stepped back half a pace, opening the door wide enough for the light to cut obliquely across his shoulder onto the hardwood floor. "Come in," I said, my voice as level as a floor balanced with steel shims. "We need to talk about $60,000 and a house about to collapse." "Tuyet voi, jai laban, dichtiep theo sang tieng an mai, gyung guyen gyong van va bong kach jan thiet lap." Part 4, the final load. He walked in like he owned the place, the dark hoodie and the smile practiced in a mirror. I stepped aside just enough for the light skewing through the doorway to hit the hardwood floor like a laser cut. "I'm Mason," he said, placing a thin folder on the table, rubbing the cover with his palm like stroking a playing card. My dad stood opposite, shoulders square but eyes red. Mom leaned against the back of a chair, her fingers searching for the edge of the fabric like a lifeline. I pulled up a chair, sat down, and opened the folder. Glossy paper, charts with soaring curve lines. The words scalable, beta, seed round, traction, scattered like cheap seasoning. "This is the investment plan," Mason said, his voice even, formally friendly. "An app connecting local artisans with clients. We're building the MVP, about to have a beta test. Helena contributed seed funding. Everything is progressing." Dad flipped the page, then flipped again. He didn't trust screens, but he knew how to read numbers. And here what he saw wasn't numbers, but beautiful color columns attempting to hide the empty spaces. "These numbers," he croaked, "can't be anchored to anything." He looked at Mason. 60,000? Mason shrugged with a, "You have to think big" smile. "Everything big starts small, sir." "Of course," I said, placing my finger on the corner of the projected growth sheet, gently pulling it back to align perfectly with the table edge. but small doesn't mean hollow. I pushed another stack of papers onto the table, printouts of the bank statements with the regular first-of-the-month transfers highlighted in yellow. This is the structural component. I looked up at Mason. The rest of the structure, the walls, beams, columns, where did you put it? He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, adopting a patient tone. I get it, Rachel. Technical people always want hard evidence right away. But a startup is structured belief. I smiled without teeth. Belief built on paper dissolves in the rain. I turned to Mom. I'm going to ask clearly, connection by connection. The sound of tires crunching on gravel outside. I glanced through the window. Helena's white sedan turned in, braking sharply on the pebbles. The door opened. She stepped out, nice jacket, hair too perfect for the morning after a fight. Her heels clicked on the porch steps like a metronome. When she entered the kitchen, the atmosphere shifted like a curtain caught by the wind. Her eyes met Mason's first, her face cracking for half a second before mending itself. "What are you doing here?" Helena's voice was thin, trying to sound normal. Mason redirected his smile. "Babe, I told you, let me explain." She looked at me, then at Dad and Mom, her eyes circling like searching for a fire exit. Dad stood up straight, his hand resting on the back of his chair, each finger a steady anchor. "You took your sister's money," he said, not shouting, just stating a thickly documented conclusion. "And you lied." "It's not like that," Helena replied quickly, as if to stop a cut from spreading. "This is an investment. We just need time. He has a clear plan." I gently touched the glossy roadmap Q1Q4 page. The milestones, launch, scale, partnerships were neatly lined up like a beautiful facade without a back wall. "What plan?" I asked. "Where's the product? Where are the beta users? Where is the accounting budget? Every single expense?" Every question I spoke was like driving a nail, slow, straight, making a sound. Mason gestured to the color-printed screen mock-ups. "This is the concept demo, the user flow we're testing internally." Early-stage investment rarely has traditional paperwork. He paused, the old smile returning. "But there's potential." I heard that word like the sound of wind whistling through a crack. It was cool, but it chilled the bone. "Potential," I repeated, "doesn't pay the mortgage interest." "Rachel?" Helena turned to me, a flicker of tremor at the corner of her lips. I believed him. I wanted to do something big, all my life. She inhaled, changing her lines in the middle of the play. "All my life, I've been measured against other people's success. This time I wanted to prove something." I said slowly, "With the family's money." Her lips tightened. "I will pay it back. Just give me more time," I finished for her, and it sounded like I had just named the thin tape covering a rotten beam. "Helena, family is a place you can fall, not a place to try jumping over a cliff without a safety rope." Dad squeezed the edge of the chair, his knuckles white. "I don't need anyone to prove anything by starving our own house." Mom turned to her older daughter, her voice strained. "Look at me. We moved our medication times. We postponed fixing the roof. Just waiting for your potential." That word made the kitchen shrink. Helena took a step back, her eyes sunken. Mason, sensing the conversational momentum shift, changed tactics, pulling 3 other sheets of paper from his pocket. "Here, an MOU contract with a partner." 3 faint logos, flicked signatures. Dad leaned closer, squinting. Scanned digital signature, no company ID, no legal clauses. It doesn't bind anything. The way dream salesmen sometimes pivot is exactly the way people turn a car. A sharp swerve disguised as a straight path. Mason stood up, switching to an older brother tone. I understand everyone is emotional, but Helena and I have the right to decide about that money. She's an adult. He looked at me, taking a victorious drag from an invisible cigarette. Rachel, don't interfere with your sister's life. The phrase, don't interfere, hit a switch in my head. The kind of switch that had been dormant for years. Interfering, I repeated, clearly, is when I transferred $5,000 every month to my parents, through Helena's account, so this house wouldn't fall. What you're doing is taking. Mason chuckled faintly. Semantics. I tilted my head, my palm flat on the table. No definition. To be fooled, you don't just need a good liar, you also need a culture that praises the wrong things. I looked at Helena, a gaze without judgment, just redrawing the shape. You wanted to be seen as having it all yourself, so you chose a person who promised you the spotlight. I pointed to the glossy papers. This is the spotlight, but where's the backstage? Where are the load-bearing walls? Helena opened her mouth, then closed it. The air hung still long enough for the fridge to hum, then stop. I heard my own voice, chillingly calm. Mason, last night I contacted a lawyer. The bank is preparing the supplementary transfer statements. There will be a report sent to the authorities if misappropriation is found. Your coming here today is good. You will state now clearly where the money went, who holds it, and what stage the product is actually at. I interlocked my hands like bracing 2 trust members. If not, you will leave my house immediately. In stories of emotional financial scams, people often talk about the breaking point, the moment the script no longer follows the path they rehearsed. Mason stood straight, his face slightly stiff. He tried to play the United Front card one more time. Helena, tell them you believe me. Helena looked at him for a long time, and there, instead of an excuse, I saw the fatigue bridging the effort. She turned back towards Dad. I transferred everything. I thought I could make it up in time. I didn't think everything would break. Tears didn't fall, only pooled. For the first time, she wasn't performing. The house, somehow, let out a long breath, like someone enduring pain without screaming. Dad didn't speak anymore. He pulled his chair back and sat down, his hands clasped. Mom went to get a cloth, placing it near Helena, not forcing anything. As for me, I turned the laptop around, opening the spreadsheet. Timeline, amount, memo. Seed prototype Taucho Beta. Secondary recipient name. I pointed to the red-colored column. These transfers, 20 times in 12 months. Each time 1 to 2 days after the first of the month. The same recipient, M. Vale. That's the pipeline. I looked at Mason. Now it's your turn to draw the rest. He forced a smirk, trying to bring the smile back, but his facial muscles betrayed him. His eye twitched slightly. I don't have to prove anything to your family. Wrong, I said, my voice not rising, only hitting the correct pitch. You owe transparency for the money that originated from other people's labor. I saw Helena tilt her head as if that sentence opened a window she hadn't known was there before. Outside, the wind swept through the trees, breaking the sunlight into fragments on the floor. Everything was suddenly clear like a technical cross-section. On one side were the glossy papers, on the other were the bank statements, on another were the wrinkles on Dad's forehead, and in the middle was Helena, the one who learned to bend light, now having to learn how to stand in the shadow without falling. "I'll be back," Mason said finally, his voice dry, "with my lawyer." "No need to come back," I replied. "If you have real documents, send them to my lawyer. And this house, from now on, is no longer a stage for your pitch." He looked at me, at Helena, glanced at my parents, then quickly gathered the glossy papers, shoving them into the folder. As he walked past, the smell of cheap cologne hit me like a misplaced comma in a blueprint. The door closed, the sound muffled between the weather stripping. In the kitchen, no one spoke right away. Helena pulled a chair over and sat down, her hands clasped, as if waiting for a verdict. I counted my breaths, 3 beats, enough for the anger to pass, so the remaining structure wouldn't crack. "Tomorrow," I said, "we go to the bank. We'll ask to freeze any remaining funds in related accounts, if possible, and file the preservation of evidence request. In the afternoon, we work with the lawyer." I turned to Mom. "Mom, give me all the past month's bills. I'll reorganize the cash flow so the house doesn't break cycle." Helena nodded, so small I would have missed it if I hadn't been paying attention. Dad looked at me longer, slowly saying, like pulling a nail out of wood, I'm sorry. Not for the comparison, not for the doubt, but for letting this house live by its surface for too long." I didn't say it's okay, I just nodded, "We fix it." We sat for a while longer, amidst the house's small sounds, the kettle gurgling, the clock ticking gently, a distant car passing. I opened a new notes page, titling it, Reinforcement Plan Phase 1. I typed the first lines, plug the money leak, check legal components, clear the emotional site. Hard structure first, soft structure second. Truth first, order later. And at the bottom of the page, I wrote a sentence, just for Helena, not reading it aloud. "Believing others isn't wrong. Wrong is placing the entire roof on a promise without columns. Tuyet voi, jai laban, dich tiep theo sang tieng an mai, gyunguyen gyongvan tu su vavan fong jan thiet lap." Part 5, Building the Evidence Case. That afternoon, once Mason had closed the door and the smell of cheap cologne still lingered in the gaps, I opened my laptop and turned the kitchen into a war room. All the familiar family tidiness, the sugar bowl, the salt shaker, the little floral coaster, had to be pushed aside. In the middle were the statements, documents, screenshots, a file I titled, The Real Structure. Evan came back with 2 black coffees. He put the cups down, squeezing my shoulder. "Time to pour the column." I connected the threads exposed in Part 3 and Part 4, like splicing 2 bridge spans. The money left me on the 1st of the month, reached Helena's account ending in 389, and then 1 to 2 days later, flowed into the place named MV, with the notes Seed Prototype Beta. Harris, the lawyer, emailed back, "Have sent the request to the bank for transfer statements and a temporary freeze on suspicious funds. Prepare for me printouts of all transfer confirmations, Helena's texts, any emails mentioning investment, and a summarized statement." I sent it off in a compressed folder simply named Truth Zip. Helena sat beside me, her hands cupped as if holding a broken object. No one consoled her. I opened a new note page, typing large, the breaking point of trust. Then I read slowly to her, like reading the pitch of a song, to someone relearning how to hear. 60,000 over 12 months. The open-ended family loan was turned into seed capital for an idea with no structural components. The name Mason Vale appears 20 times. There is no accounting budget, no contracts with legal seals. I looked up. Are you facing it, or are you running? Helena looked into the space above the stove, where the sunlight hit a small yellow streak. I'm so tired, Rachel. I believed it, because I needed someone to tell me I wasn't ordinary. I replied without harshness, needing it isn't wrong, but he exploited that exact need. In the afternoon, the door knocked again. This time it wasn't Mason. A young woman held a boy, about 2 years old, her rain-soaked coat clinging to her cheek. The mix of awkwardness and desperation made me instinctively stand straight. Hi, I'm sorry to bother you. I'm Kira. Could I ask if this is the house of Helena, Ms. Helena who worked with Mason? His name came out like a small stone, dropping into a full glass of water. I opened the door for her, pouring a warm glass of water. Kira opened her phone, showing me a series of messages. Mason's avatar, promises, requests for delays, then silence. He owes child support for 8 months, she said softly. I heard he was raising capital. I traced his friends and got your sister's name. Kira hadn't come to fight. She came because she was exhausted. Helena appeared at the kitchen doorway, stiffening when she saw Kira. Their eyes met, a look that shattered the polished mirror. You have a child? Helena whispered. Kira nodded gently. He said, if I just didn't make a fuss, everything would be fine after the initial phase. I invited Kira to sit. We are collecting evidence, I said. If you wish, our lawyer can contact you. We need more testimony for the police to open a fraud case. Kira hugged her son tighter, as if she had just heard the first beam of a bridge being laid. Thank you, I will. She left her number, departing in the now lighter rain, leaving a faint scent of baby soap. A silent piece of evidence about what Mason owed was not just money. That evening, Harris called on video. Her face was neat on the square screen. The bank confirmed the money flow. I'm sending a letter of preservation to Mason's email social media platforms to secure the evidence. Tomorrow morning, we file the request to open an investigation for financial fraud. With the current evidence, statements, vague project descriptions, Kira's testimony, we have a chance to force him to account at the investigative level. Important, no more one-on-one confrontations. From now on, only paperwork. I hung up, sitting before the stack of papers that felt quiet. When an architect can give the correct name to the components, they no longer have to guess whether a wall is thick or thin. I wrote the next steps into the reinforcement plan, phase 1. 1. Freeze the money flow. 2. Create an evidence catalog. 3. Protect the vulnerable, mom. 4. Establish a clear path for conversation with dad to shift the role from command to shared responsibility. I added item 5 in a language reserved for Helena. Separate my sister from the manipulator's orbit, even if it means bearing the aftershock of shame. At night, the house felt less stubborn. Mom washed the dishes, the water running steadily. Dad sat, his large hands resting together like 2 red bricks. He spoke softly, the words rough. Oh, I ruined the stage, letting our oldest daughter be called enough. just because everyone said so. I'm sorry. I didn't patch it up with an "it's okay." I gently touched his shoulder. We fix it from the foundation. Helena brought down a shoebox. Inside wasn't Mason's glamorous paper, but small invoices, coffee, clothes, cosmetics, and a few transfer slips to Mason noted rent, car, utilities. She sighed. He said it was just for a month or two. I laid each piece on the table, like arranging a puzzle. This is where the potential flowed, every drop. Helena looked, and for the first time accepted. He used me, and I also used everyone's belief. She didn't cry. Crying now would wash away the signature ink. I nodded. Tomorrow, when Harris files the complaint, the police will need your statement, not to humiliate you, but to block his path to using others like he used you. The next morning, we went to the police station. The officer on duty received the file, turning each page like turning a brick wall. Statements, check. Bank confirmations, check. Texts, check. Witness testimony, check. Project description, vague but usable. He asked Helena to recount the timeline, the first time Mason mentioned investment, the amount, the promise. Helena spoke, her voice even, less flowery than ever. Leaving the station, the early winter sun caught on the leaves like bright rivets. In the car, I said to Helena what I hadn't said in 10 years. You don't need to prove you're special with someone else's spotlight. Some things stand not because they're brilliant, but because they're correctly load-rated. Helena leaned back, sighing. I was afraid. If I wasn't the one who had it all, I was nobody. I replied, you are someone learning responsibility. That's enough to start. That afternoon, Harris messaged, please invite Mason to the house one more time. Tell him to bring the real documents to finalize the investment roadmap. I've coordinated with the authorities to be ready. If he shows up and tries to continue the script, we can catch the intentional misappropriation, concealment in the act. If he doesn't come, the file still moves forward. I read the message, feeling a different kind of fear, not fear of comparison, but fear of a dirty final scene. But an architect also has to get used to standing in a dusty construction site to see the correct wind direction. That evening, I texted Mason, tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., bring the original contract, company documents, capital contribution statements, and signed deployment schedule from partners. If not, don't come. The message was seen. No reply. I put the phone down, reopened the evidence catalog, renumbered, stapled, and taped notes. The kitchen became a final design studio, papers scattered, but not one out of place. Mom went to bed early. Dad sat next to me, silent, then placed his hand on the stack of files. A wordless nod. At dawn, the sky was thin with fog. I boiled water, made coffee, cleared the tabletop. Helena walked in, her eyes slightly tired but steady. I'll sit here, she said, pointing to the chair right against the wall, no longer wanting to be at the center of the frame. I pulled the curtain, letting in enough light without glare. 6:58 a.m. Everything was in position, like a structure before final inspection. 7:03 a.m. The doorbell rang. The house's heart beat one rhythm. I went to open it. Mason stood there, hoodie, the familiar smile, a thin folder. In the distance, faintly at the corner of the street, a pale blue and red light, like a signed appointment. Good morning, he said. Ready? I stepped aside, inviting him in. Ready, but this time the structure will be stress tested before you erect the facade. He raised an eyebrow, not understanding. I pointed to the table, the files, a neatly placed pen. Everything was so quiet, I could hear the wheels grinding softly on the gravel outside. I sat down, opened his file, still glossy paper, still the word potential, still missing structural components. I looked up, not smiling. Do you have anything real? Mason opened his mouth, and just as the first word of a new lie was about to be cast, out on the street, the familiar sound, blue and red, began to approach the steps. This time, we didn't wait for the house to crack further. This time, we called the components by their right names and let the right people do the rest. Tuyet voi jai la bandich, tiep theo sang tieng an mai, gyung guyen gyong van tu suva, fong kach jan thiet lap. Part 6. Bracing the Structure. The siren didn't wail, just the blue and red lights sweeping across the wall like two chalk lines checking for plumb. Wheels crunched on the gravel for a brief moment. Mason hadn't managed to pour out another slick promise before two officers stepped onto the porch, rapping sharply in a practiced rhythm. "Good morning, Mason Vale," the taller one asked, his voice not harsh but tight like a steel cut. Mason tilted his head, his practiced smile shining. "Is there a problem, officers?" "We are just—" The other officer gently lifted the file folder. "We have received a request for preservation of evidence from the family's attorney, along with a petition to investigate alleged misappropriation through fraudulent investment. We need you to come with us for questioning." Mason turned to Helena, shoving his hand into his hoodie pocket, as if searching for a thread of composure. "Say something. They misunderstood." "No," Helena said, her voice low like a less windy road. "They didn't misunderstand." A space opened up, just wide enough for the truth to pass through. The officer read him his rights. The handcuffs clicked with a quiet finality, not too loud, not too soft, like a turnbuckle set in the correct position. Mason tried to smile, but his facial muscles betrayed him, his eye twitching. "You're making a mistake," he said, the familiar line of those who think they are the script writers. "Everything will be clear." I inclined my head politely. Yes, in the right place. The door closed, the sound muffled between the weather stripping. The car pulled away, the blue and red fading. The kitchen was empty, like a construction site after the scaffolding is taken down. Dad leaned his hands on the table, letting out a heavy breath. Mom pulled a chair for Helena, placing a glass of water in front of her. No one said it's over, because we all knew today was just pouring the column. Tomorrow meant pouring the beams, setting the walls, waiting for the concrete to cure. Harris called immediately after, her voice efficient. "Good, they took him in for initial questioning. I'll forward Kira's notes and 2 new witnesses, I just received them, who also funneled money into this project. Rachel, I need Helena in my office this afternoon to give a detailed statement and sign the cooperation agreement." Helena listened and nodded. Yes. The word was crisp and real, like a pen stroke confirming a checked box. That afternoon at Harris's office, the white light poured evenly, like in a measuring lab. In front of Helena was a bound stack of paper, the blueprint of truth. Harris was calm. "Tell me everything from the first meeting to every transfer, every promise. No embellishments. Just precision." Helena began. The first coffee shop, the phrase, "You have the fire." The presentation with the poster-perfect mock-up. The invitation that this is your chance to stop being someone's sister and become yourself. The first $5,000, then more, then more. The deadlines that were always postponed because the partner hadn't signed. The glossy papers without legal standing. Her voice wasn't shaky. She was just counting. Harris underlined, highlighted, asking the questions of where, when, how much. The questions that make glamour fade. They took Kira's statement at the end of the day. Kira held her son, speaking softly. He said if I didn't make trouble, he would pay regularly. Then he disappeared. Harris asked, "Do you agree to be a named witness?" Kira looked at her son, then nodded. In law, some words are very dry. Agree, confirm, commit. But every time they are said in the right place, a piece of the structure is put into its load-bearing position. 2 weeks later was the first official meeting with the investigative unit. I won't detail the legal specifics, they are words and signatures, but I clearly remember 2 things. 1. The project existed only on pretty printouts. There was no registered company, no actual invoices, no payroll, no beta users, just one bank account receiving money from multiple women in different cities with the same memo motif. Seed, beta, jug phase 1. 2. The records showed Mason had a civil record for child support debt. The file Kira brought opened a door we hadn't touched before. While the file moved, our house shifted into a less performative rhythm. Mom stopped pulling the curtains wide open, letting in just enough light. Dad stopped making comparisons. He learned to ask, "What do you need me to do?" Helena took a temporary job in a small downtown office, basic work, data entry, emailing, photocopying. In the evenings, she came home with a half-eaten lunchbox and the smell of printer paper. I saw faint ink marks on her hands, the mark of less glamorous but solid labor. I didn't overpraise, I acknowledged it. A structure doesn't need fireworks, it needs stability. 3 months later, the court held the preliminary hearing. The courtroom was small, wooden chairs, the sound of shoes echoing softly on the floor. Mason wore a white shirt, his chin neatly shaved, still with the familiar practiced smile, but his eyes had nowhere to anchor. The prosecutor read the indictment. Theft by deception through an investment entity that didn't exist. Using multiple victims' money for personal expenses. Deliberate concealment of use. His lawyer argued sincere entrepreneurial intent. Project failed due to the market. Exaggerated family conflict. That's when the difference between a glossy paper and a technical drawing became clear. The glossy paper is dazzling, but it won't stand long. When it was the witness's turn, Kira stepped up. She spoke briefly. The relationship, the promises, the months he dodged responsibility for his son. Her voice wasn't loud, but every number she stated was like laying a brick. Then Helena. I watched her stand up, back straight, no expensive jacket, no perfume, just a woman with an unpolished story. I transferred my sister's money, intended to help my parents, to Mason because he called it seed capital, she said. I wanted someone to tell me I could have it all myself. I let that sentence blind me. I wronged my family. And he, she paused, then looked straight at Mason, taught me the cost of a promise without a beam or column. The opposing lawyer tried to pull her into an emotional drama. You resent your sister, right? You wanted to push the blame outward. Helena shook her head, the answer short and final. I'm accepting my part. I also want him to accept his. Sometimes justice is served not through grand speeches, but through simple, load-bearing sentences. The sentence came without fanfare: 3 years imprisonment, 18 months non-parole, partial restitution, to the victims based on recoverable assets, prohibited from engaging in fundraising investment during supervised release. I remember the moment. No one applauded. Only the sound of the wooden chairs scraping, the clerk's pen writing notes, and the relieved exhale of people who had held their breath for too long. Mason turned his head for a second before being led away. The smile was gone, only a whispered thought. There will be others. I looked straight at him, and there will be others like us who call the truth by its name sooner. Stepping outside, the weather was bright and cool. Not the kind of cold that cuts, but the kind of clean crispness after a rain. Dad walked beside me, saying nothing, just lightly gripping my wrist for a moment. A big, warm, heavy hand. Mom refastened a button on Helena's coat. A small gesture I hadn't seen in a long time. We stood on the courthouse steps for a moment. No photos, no moment. Just breathing. In my head, the words of my profession returned. Load distribution revised. Foundation must be treated. Regular inspection cycle. In my heart, the words of home sprang up. I'm sorry, let's work together. Let's share the burden. That evening, I gathered a small box, invoices, a few photos, a slip of paper that Mason had once given, saying seed. I asked Helena to join me in the backyard. The sky was still. I struck a match. The fire consumed the paper bit by bit, curling into thin smoke that rose straight up. He took a lot of things from you, Helena said, her voice even. Not just money. I replied, then make sure you reclaim it with the thing he doesn't have, responsibility. The fire died down, the ashes fine and black, warm on my palm as I scooped them away. At night, I reopened the reinforcement plan, phase 2, fix the roof, replace the porch railing, change automated payments straight to the bank, regular family finance check-ins every quarter, scheduled uninterrupted conversation time on the first Sunday evening of the month. I wrote the final line. No one gets to be the lead role if the real structure isn't standing. Then I shut the laptop. Walking past Helena's room, I stopped because I heard a rustling sound. She was sorting through an old envelope of photos. 2 kids at a fair, hands sticky with sugar, smiling with missing teeth. Her face wasn't bright, just light. Thank you for pulling me out of the wrong spotlight, she said. I smiled. Tomorrow night, let's install the new stair railing. I bought new screws. Helena nodded. I need to learn how to twist them. I nodded back. That was the only kind of promise I wanted to hear now. With beams, with columns, with human hands. The house settled into quiet, not the suffocating silence of comparison-laden dinners, but a silence that served as a backdrop for the sound of hammers, saws, and people. We weren't done, but we had set the first components in their correct positions. And tomorrow morning, when the sun shone through the windows, the light, that invisible material, would pass through the house like a gentle inspection. What is sufficient? What is lacking? What needs further reinforcement? Spring returned like a new coat of paint. It didn't hide the cracks, but it covered the surface that had been repaired. Mom opened the curtains earlier, letting the soft morning sun pour across the kitchen table, letting the scent of rosemary from the backyard bed seep into the house. Every morning, Dad went out to the porch, toolbox in hand, tightening the railing bolt he had postponed for years. Helena went regularly to her small downtown office, bringing back simple stories. A file printing error, a shift she covered, a thank you from her boss for meeting a deadline. I sat beside them, listening to those details that seemed like nothing but saw a structure being drafted. Quietly, but bearing weight, I put a small check mark next to the item, stable rhythm of life, in my reinforcement plan. One afternoon in March, Helena gave me the old envelope of photos, the 2 children on the fair carousel, hands sticky with sugar, smiling with missing teeth. On the back, in her handwriting, thanks for not leaving me when I deserved to be left. I didn't say it's okay. I just hugged her. Stepping back, I said, "New railing tonight." She nodded, her eyes bright in the gentlest way, like a construction light, not fireworks. We brought the tape measure, screws, and L-brackets out to the porch. The drill bit bit into the wood steadily. The sound of the screw threads tightening into the metal was firm, like a load-bearing heartbeat. Dad stood watching, then reached out to hold the washer straight. Mom brought out water, setting up a small chair. No one said grand words. We did the small tasks that had been postponed before. I knew that eventually I would have to leave this house that no longer weighed so heavily on my chest. The job offer in Seattle, a community housing project with the architectural team I had dreamed of joining since college, came like a nod from the future. I told my parents and Helena one evening in early April. Mom touched my hand, smiling. "You design. The house here already has a blueprint." Dad nodded briefly. "I can tighten the bolts myself now." And Helena, she exhaled as if setting down a burden she had misplaced for too long. "Go. This time I'm standing here not for a photo op, but to watch the house." The day I packed my suitcase, the sunlight slanted against the wall, shining through the newly painted spots that were imperceptible from the old. I pulled open my desk drawer, finding the sketch of the first house that won the freshman award. Wide windows, a roof to catch the wind, straight columns. I slid the paper into my jacket pocket, like carrying a reminder. Light enters the house because of the components, not because of a promise. Mom folded a small handkerchief for me. Dad slipped his old multi-tool into my hand. "Fix things when you need to." Helena clipped the fair photo to my suitcase handle. "Don't let Seattle turn you into a stranger to yourself." On the way to the airport, I looked in the rearview mirror. The house looked smaller, but lighter. I remembered many sounds, the kettle gurgling, the sound of Harris's pen underlining in the statement, Kira saying, "I agree," the click of the handcuffs on the wrist of the man who called an empty dream potential. But the sound I remembered most was the drill from the previous night. The sound saying that a component was finally in its correct, load-bearing position. I smiled to myself. I used to think happiness had to be dramatic. It turns out it's a tidy technical diagram. Seattle greeted me with soft rain. The new office smelled of plywood, printer ink, and filtered coffee. The first project was a cluster of homes for middle-income families. Right from the concept stage, we debated light as a basic right and common space as community memory. I spoke more than usual. I told a story without names, using only structure. When a house cracks, don't cover it with pictures. Replace the beam. Colleagues listened, nodding. My team leader, a woman with eyes as sharp as a steel ruler, gave me the task she called difficult but worthy. Detailed design for the staircase structure and railings, so the elderly and children wouldn't fall. I accepted. I was grateful for the chance to put my hand to a place where people are prone to slipping. In the evening, I video called home. Mom showed off her rosemary bed, neatly pruned. Dad showed off the new, silent bolt he tightened. Helena held up her office lunchbox, smiling. Doesn't smell as good as home, but it's a meal bought with my salary. Then she brought the camera close to the porch wall. See the grout lines? I chuckled. Even, not straight in a forced way, but straight in a correctly load-rated way. We didn't mention Mason anymore. The restitution file was still running. The court had ruled. Time would do the rest. Healthy fairness isn't loud. It has a schedule. One quiet evening, Helena texted a photo. This month's mortgage statement paid on time from Mom and Dad's account, not through anyone. Just one small note. Checked. I sat in my new apartment, watching the rain tap gently on the glass, thinking about the sentences that used to hang in our home. Your sister built all this herself. Not like you. They no longer had a place to echo. In the sound of the rain, I wrote another sentence in my notebook. No one has it all themselves. Even the best stand on an invisible social structure. Only two things should be self-responsibility and self-naming the truth. I returned to Austin in late May, a quick weekend trip home. The smell of fresh paint still lingered. The porch railing was cool to the touch. The banister no longer shook. Mom poured tea. Dad showed me the family finance check-in schedule on the fridge. Every quarter had a reconciliation box with a task for each person. Helena pushed a white envelope onto the middle of the table. Inside was a small check marked installment payment, her self-elected reimbursement for the $60,000 that was lost. I looked at her. This is a step, not the end. She nodded. I know I want to step. Some promises don't need to be grand. They need to be steady. That evening, we sat on the porch. The sun dipped behind the trees, the light withdrawing from the wooden floor, leaving a warmth like quiet coals. Dad spoke slowly. I'm proud of you, Rachel. The first time he said it without dragging anyone else's shadow along. I heard the words like a perfectly placed shim, bracing a crossbeam that once wavered. Mom smiled, saying she would make rosemary chicken tomorrow. Helena added, and I'll clean the kitchen. We laughed. After a long time, the laughter didn't sound like a performance. Before bed, I stood at the door of my old room. The glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling had faded, but I didn't want to peel them off. They reminded me that some maps are no longer for travel, but are still worth keeping, to remember that I once believed in a certain sky. I closed the door, knowing I would leave again tomorrow, and knowing that this house no longer held me with obligation. It held me with the truth we had placed back together. If you've listened this far and found a bit of your home in my story, or some structure you're trying to hold up, I hope you find the courage to name the components. Where is the beam? Where is the wall? Where is the beautiful but hollow paint job? Choose to replace the beam before you hang more pictures. Speak out before you swallow more. And if you need to, ask someone else to help you hold the ruler. Thank you for staying until the end of the story. I wish you and your family health and peace, and that your homes stand firm, not because of shouting, but because responsibility and love are correctly load-rated. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more Drama X Documentary X Vindication stories, where we rebuild the houses that have cracked with truth and humanity.